Go to hell. It's over. You ready? Rest in peace.
If you want to get more closely acquainted with Vergil's Doppelganger mechanic, I strongly encourage you to watch my first video, which is basically this Doppelganger guide, where I go very in-depth into the basics, the rudimentary aspects of this mechanic. The link to that video will be in the description below, so yeah. So first things first, before I start talking about the combo and the mistakes you can make and all that jazz, I should preface this by talking about my controls. So I play this game using my mouse and keyboard. Yeah, really. Blasphemy, I know. But I think that if you've ever played a single game on your PC using a mouse and a keyboard, these controls should be familiar to you. I think they're very easy to grasp. So, just like with almost every game ever, WASD are the keys you use for movement. So W is forward, S is backwards, A is left, D is right. This is the equivalent to you using your analog stick for moving, like tilting it left, right, forward, backward. That's basically what I use. So again, W forward, S backward, A left, D right. Obviously, just like in every game ever, space is jump. So I jump using space. The left mouse button, unsurprisingly, is the attack button. Also, like in every game ever. The right mouse button is the button I use for Mirage Blades. So all my Mirage Blade attacks are mapped to the right button. The right mouse button, I mean. So that's basically it for these basic controls. Shift is the button I use for locking on. So when I lock on, I press Shift. In this game, you gotta be locked on for just about any attack ever. Only under specific circumstances should you release the lock on. But yeah, basically lock on is Shift in my case. So next up we've got the trick action. So, trick up, down, air trick, all that stuff. I use E. So E is the button I use. So if I press E without locking on, that is trick up. If I press E while locking on, like Shift plus E, that is air trick, and I teleport. If I press back to forward plus E, or S plus W plus E, that is trick down. So, like I said, E is the trick action. That's the button I use for tricking, basically. R is the button I use for taunting. So that's the taunt button. Air taunts, lock-on taunts, doesn't matter. R is the button you gotta press for taunting. Moving on, I have F, and F is the button I use to charge my Sin Double trigger. So I press and hold F, then I release it, and I basically go into my Sin Double trigger mode. Moving on, we also have 1 and 2. So 1 is the button for changing the weapon to the right. So my layout is as follows. I use the default layout for my weapons, my arsenal. So it goes Yamato, Beowulf, Mirage Edge. So if I have the Yamato equipped and I press 1, it will switch to Beowulf, which is the weapon to its right. And if I press 1 again, it will switch from Beowulf to the Mirage Edge, which is the weapon to its right. If I have the Yamato equipped, and I press 2, it will go to the weapon that's on its left, and that is the Mirage Edge. If I press 2 again, it will switch to Beowulf. If I press 2 again, it will once again switch to the Yamato. So that's how this works. It's for switching weapons left and right. That's how it works. Moving on, we have the Doppelganger buttons. So the buttons are as follows. X is the slow doppelganger. This is a doppelganger that is kind of delayed by about, I don't know, half a second or something. So that's X. C is the normal Doppelganger. He is slightly delayed, not by half a second, but, like, he's just not completely in sync with you. So that's C. And V is the haste version of the Doppelganger who is completely in sync with you, meaning that he immediately reacts to your commands and he mimics your inputs. He registers them immediately and simply reacts to them. So, yeah. I deactivate the Doppelganger by pressing Z. So that's how I do it. And, you know, that's pretty much... those are all the controls, really. There are some other things like, you know, using CTRL to basically lock onto multiple targets, or, I mean, switch the lock on, stuff like that, or using the arrows, using, you know, it just doesn't matter, really. These are the main things that you will need. So, if I say, I'm pressing D plus left mouse button, that means that I'm pressing right plus attack button. If I say I'm pressing S plus W plus left mouse button, that means I'm pressing back to forward plus attack button. Kind of like tilting your analog stick back and then forward and then pressing the attack button. So that's how it works. If I say back to forward plus right mouse button, or S plus W plus right mouse button, that is basically back to forward plus your Mirage Blade button. So heavy rain blades in my case. But don't worry, most of the time, like 99% of the time, I'll say right plus attack button instead of D plus left mouse button, because I feel like that's more universally comprehensible, if you know what I mean. So, yeah, these are my controls, and now let's talk about the actual combo. Alright, so now we got the night combo, and this is the last combo that I did, somewhere around October or something, I don't really know. It's kind of irrelevant right now. So this is a combo by OF, but they changed their name from OF to KF, and now they're called Fanny. It says on Twitter, you know, their pronouns are like she, her, so I guess it's a girl. I really have no idea, but doesn't really matter. It's completely extraneous to the topic at hand right now. So this is kind of like partially, in part, it's one of their combos. And it's from their Combo Mad, like their combo video called Combo Dad, but then they changed the name to Combo Daj, and now it's called Combo Mom, so it doesn't really matter. Now, yeah, so let's just get into the combo, really. So, you gotta be in your Sin DT for the entirety of this combo, and you start the combo by summoning the slow version of the Doppelganger, the one who is not in sync with you, he's delayed. So you call the slow Doppelganger and you use Rising Star with the Yamato. So you press right and you hold the attack button. This will cause Vergil to use Rising Star and his Doppelganger to use Rapid Slash. And this is a setup that appears in like 5 other combos. It is... I've explained it like a billion times, but I'll do it again. So, alright, so basically right plus attack button is Rapid Slash, but right plus holding the attack button is Rising Star. So let's say you have the slow version of the Doppelganger active. If you were to press right plus attack button, what would happen is Vergil will do Rapid Slash. The Doppelganger would also do Rapid Slash, but since he's delayed, he would do it half a second later, but he would still mimic your commands. But let's say you pressed right and you held the attack button. What would happen is Vergil would do Rising Star, but the Doppelganger would react to your commands, he would react to you pressing right plus holding the attack button, but he would do it half a second later because he's delayed. But by that time, it will have been too late because the enemy will have already been in the air. And this is really important because you can't do Rising Star unless you're making contact with the enemy. So if you press right and you hold the attack button, that's Rising Star. But if the enemy is airborne, it doesn't matter if you're holding the attack button, you will simply go right under them and you will do Rapid Slash, because Rising Star only activates upon contact with the enemy. And in this case, you know, Vergil's Doppelganger is reacting to you pressing right and holding the attack button. But the reason he's doing Rapid Slash is because the enemy is in the air, Vergil launched him into the air with Rising Star, and they have no choice but to use Rapid Slash because they can't make contact with the enemy. So that's basically how this works. If we were using the haste version of the Doppelganger, you know, the Doppelganger who was completely in sync with you, and if we had that guy active and we pressed right and held the attack button, well, in that case, both Vergil and the Doppelganger would basically use Rising Star in tandem because there's no delay. But since we're using the slow Doppelganger, he is delayed by like half a second. So yeah. So you basically use Rising Star, the Doppelganger will use Rapid Slash, and while the Doppelganger is using Rapid Slash, you change their mode from slow to normal. You can also change it from slow to haste, but this works better. So make sure you change their mode, because if you don't change their mode, they're not going to be able to react to what you press in time. So yeah. So you change the Doppelganger's mode from slow to normal at around this point while they're using Rapid Slash or something. So now that you're done using Rising Star, you switch to Beowulf and you use Lunar Phase, which is right plus attack button. Now, you'll notice that the Doppelganger, who is on the right side on the ground, is using upper slash with the Yamato. Ignore that, it's completely irrelevant. I'll explain why it happens. The reason this happens is because the Doppelganger can only use the Yamato. He can't use Beowulf. And when you're on the left side and you have Beowulf and you press right plus attack button, that is Lunar Phase. But when you're on the right side, on the ground with the Yamato, which is the case with the Doppelganger, pressing right plus attack button is upper slash. So the Doppelganger mimics your commands, but he can only use the Yamato, so he uses upper slash. But it has no bearing on the combo, so yeah. So after using Lunar Phase, and this is very important, you switch to the Mirage Edge, and you basically use Helmbreaker. Now, Helmbreaker is just pressing the attack button once when you're in the air with the Mirage Edge. But in this case, you don't want to do that. If you press the attack button, if you use, you know, this normal Helmbreaker, what's going to happen is the Doppelganger will simply use one hit with the Yamato on the ground. And the reason this happens is you press the attack button once, and this caused Vergil to use Helmbreaker because he has the Mirage Edge equipped, but the Doppelganger is on the ground and can only use the Yamato, and he reacts to you pressing the attack button once, and he does one hit with the Yamato, because pressing the attack button once on the ground with the Yamato just causes you to use one hit with the Yamato. So how do you circumvent this? What do? It's very simple. Instead of pressing the attack button and nothing but the attack button, while using Helmbreaker, you press left and you hold the attack button. This will cause Vergil to use Helmbreaker, so that's the same, that doesn't change, but his Doppelganger will use Rising Star. And let me explain why this happens. So, like I said, I explained what happens if you only press the attack button once. But if you press left plus attack button and you hold the attack button, Vergil will still use Helmbreaker, but the Doppelganger, who is on the right side, on the ground, with the Yamato, will react to you pressing left and holding the attack button, and he will use Rising Star, because pressing left and holding the attack button when you're on the right side, on the ground, with the Yamato, causes you to use Rising Star. The Doppelganger copies your commands and can only use the Yamato, which is why he does this. So, that's really important. So, anyway, you basically press left and you hold the attack button. If you don't hold the attack button, if you only press left plus attack button without holding the attack button, what's going to happen is Vergil's Doppelganger will use Rapid Slash instead of Rising Star. Because pressing left and holding the attack button, that is Rising Star. But pressing left plus attack button without holding the attack button, that is only Rapid Slash. So you got to press left and you got to hold the attack button. So you press left and you hold the attack button, and immediately after you hit the ground with Helmbreaker, you immediately use Trig Down to gain some distance. And now you wait just a little bit, for the Doppelganger to be done with Rising Star, and now you use Million Stab, which is right plus holding the attack button. Now, this will cause Vergil to use this inverse million stab. This is normal, and so you press right and you hold the attack button, that's million stab, but the Doppelganger will use aerial cleave to pin the enemy to the ground. Now, the reason this happens is because when you're on the left side, on the ground with the Mirage Edge, and you press right and you hold the attack button, that is million stab. But if you press right plus attack button when you're on the right side, in midair, with the Yamato, which is the case with the Doppelganger, that is aerial cleave. So, that's why the Doppelganger ends up doing aerial cleave, again. So now that the Doppelganger has pinned the enemy to the ground, you will be able to catch the enemy with million stab, and at this point you immediately deactivate the Doppelganger, so yeah. And now you keep mashing the attack button, and at some point you cancel this million stab into overdrive. And now, at around this height, at around this altitude, you input the heavy rain blades, which is back to forward plus Mirage Blade button, and this will freeze the enemy in midair. And now you charge, you keep holding the attack button, and you charge the overdrive beam 3 times. So now you hold the attack button, and you don't let go of it, and you charge overdrive 3 times, so you do the full overdrive. And you don't let go of the attack button until the enemy has either hit the ground or is very, very close to the ground. And let me explain why. So this would happen a billion times. I would release overdrive before the enemy would hit the ground. Like, as immediately after getting unfrozen, I would basically I would basically let go of the attack button, and what would happen is the enemy would be too high up in the air, they would be caught by the overdrive beam too soon, and I would not be able to use Rising Star to launch the enemy into the air. Instead, I would end up using Rapid Slash. And the reason this happens, as I've previously explained, is, Rising Star is left plus holding the attack button with the Yamato. But if the enemy is too high up in the air and you can't make contact with them, even though you're pressing left and holding the attack button, you will use Rapid Slash instead of Rising Star. You will go right under the enemy. In this case, if you let go of the overdrive, like if you let go of the attack button and release overdrive before the enemy has fully hit the ground or is very close to hitting the ground, what's going to happen is they will be too high up in the air and you won't be able to follow the combo up with Rising Star. So it's very important to know exactly when to release this overdrive beam. In the original combo, I didn't wait for the enemy to fully hit the ground, but they were still very close to the ground. But if you want to be safe, you can, let them hit the ground. It's not gonna ruin the combo or anything. It depends heavily on the distance. If the enemy is very close to you, you got to be able to calculate this. If the enemy is very close to you, that means that you're supposed to wait a very long time before you release overdrive. So as you can see here, the enemy is very close to me, and I have to wait for them to fall to the ground completely before releasing overdrive. But here, in the original combo, I didn't have to wait that long. As you can see, I released the attack button, I released overdrive before the enemy, fully hit the ground, because he wasn't that close to me. So it really depends on the distance. If the enemy is, closer to you, that means that you're supposed to wait for them to fully hit the ground before releasing overdrive. But if you can calculate, you got to have a feeling for it. If you can see that the enemy isn't that close to you, then you have some wiggle room, you have some leeway, and you will be able to release overdrive and let go of the attack button before the enemy hits the ground. But it's very risky, so maybe you might want to wait for the enemy to hit the ground altogether, regardless of what the case is. So yeah. So now that you're finished with overdrive, you switch to the Yamato and you use Rising Star. Now you switch back to the Mirage Edge and you use Helmbreaker, which is just pressing the attack button once, and you use Enemy Step to jump cancel the Helmbreaker. So you press attack button and then you press jump. In my case, I press the left mouse button and then I press space. So you jump cancel the Helmbreaker. You don't want to do the full Helmbreaker, because if you do, you will basically pin the enemy to the ground alongside you know, you'll pin yourself to the ground alongside the enemy. So, you know, you don't want that. So, by using Helmbreaker, you will basically pin the enemy directly onto this overdrive beam. So, they will be trapped on the overdrive beam. And now you use Air Stinger, which is left plus attack button, and you keep holding the attack button. And then when your Mirage Edge starts glowing, at some point you release Round Trip. So that's why you have to hold the attack button, because when you have the Mirage Edge equipped and you press the attack button and you hold it for more than a second and a half, you're gonna, you know, basically when you release the attack button, Vergil will use Round Trip. So that is why you gotta hold the attack button while using Air Stinger. And then you release this Round Trip. But just a word of advice, this is paramount. You have to wait a little. Don't immediately release the attack button immediately after your Mirage Edge starts glowing. Wait just a little bit for Vergil to lose a little bit of altitude. Just wait for Vergil. You can see here, I don't immediately let go of the attack button to release Round Trip. I kind of wait a little for Vergil to lose some altitude, and then I release Round Trip. I'll explain why later. So now that you're done releasing the Round Trip, you use Air Trick to teleport to the enemy, and then you use Trig Down to teleport to the ground. Now you switch to Beowulf, and you use Hell on Earth with Beowulf. Alright, so now, you know how the enemy is on this overdrive beam? They're trapped on it? Well, at some point, well, now, the overdrive beam will explode, and when the overdrive beam explodes, it will launch the enemy directly into Vergil's direction, and the enemy will fall directly, well, not fall, but they will basically fly directly onto the Round Trip that is above Vergil. So they will be trapped by the Round Trip, they'll get sliced up by it, and they won't fall to the ground because, you know, Round Trip prevents that. So, you know, the overdrive beam, it kind of blows the enemy away into the Round Trip, and then as they're being sliced up, Vergil charges Hell on Earth and hits the enemy with this explosion. And that is the end of the combo. Now, let me get back to this thing that I said about, you know, like Round Trip. So, this is why you have to wait before releasing Round Trip. As you can see here, I released Round Trip too soon, too early, and what ended up happening was, when I try to use Hell on Earth, or in this case, Judgment Cut End for some reason, the enemy, they got launched into Vergil's direction, but since the Round Trip was too high up in the air, the enemy didn't get caught by it. So they just flew away, you know, and they fell to the ground. This is why you need to wait before, you know, releasing Round Trip. You just wait a little bit for Vergil to lose some altitude, and then you release it. As you can see here on the screen in the video, you can see approximately when I release Round Trip. I wait just a little bit for Vergil to lose some altitude, and then I release it. Because if you immediately release it, what's going to happen is, you know, the enemy, like I said, will get launched into Vergil's direction, and since the Round Trip is too high up, they won't get caught by it. So, yeah. So this is the most prevalent issue, if you could even call it an issue. So, when you do this combo, you know how when you press right plus attack button, Vergil is supposed to use melee and stab, and the Doppelganger is supposed to use aerial cleave, because when you're on the right side in the air with the Yamato, pressing right plus attack button is aerial cleave, right? Well, as you can see here, this happened over 100 times. The Doppelganger, instead of using aerial cleave, they use 1 slash with the Yamato, 1 slash of aerial rave. So it's like the game doesn't register me pressing right plus attack button, it only registers me pressing the attack button. And this is impossible because, you know, if I hadn't pressed the attack button, Vergil will not have been, you know, if I hadn't pressed right plus attack button, Vergil will not have been able to use melee and stab. And the reason this happens is because of the camera. This happens a lot in this game. It's a camera issue. I cannot explain it, but don't fret, don't worry. This is not an issue. It is, but it's not. because Vergil's Doppelganger doesn't necessarily have to use aerial cleave to pin the enemy to the ground. It's not a necessity. It only looks stylish, but it's not important. So you could simply deactivate the Doppelganger as soon as they're done using Rising Star. So the Doppelganger does Rising Star, and you deactivate him. And now that Vergil is, using Million Stab, the enemy will still fall to the ground, and they will be caught by Million Stab. So it doesn't matter, they will still fall to the, they'll still fall, and you will be able to catch them with Million Stab. The Doppelganger doesn't really do anything. They just kind of facilitate that process. They expedite it, but it doesn't really, it doesn't change anything. You can simply deactivate the Doppelganger and the enemy will still get caught by Million Stab. So, yeah. So sometimes the Doppelganger simply would not move, and you can't even start the combo that way. This is not exclusive to the Knight combo. This happens with a lot of combos that you start by summoning the Doppelganger. I think it's a camera thing or something. It doesn't really matter. Yeah, it can happen a few times, but really, I mean, come on, it's the start of the combo. It doesn't really matter. So that's one issue. The second issue that I literally have to mention because it's quite possibly it's one of the most recurring issues, and it's this issue. I call it the WTF issue because I have no idea how to explain it. So the Doppelganger does Rising Star, but instead of launching the enemy into the air, they blow the enemy. You can see what's going on here. Like, the enemy doesn't get launched into the air. It just, they get hit by the Doppelganger, and then they fly away in some random direction. I absolutely have no idea why this happens. I don't know if it's a stage issue, if it's a space issue, if it's a distance issue, if it's an... I don't know. So I don't know what the hell causes this. Like I said, I have some theories, but I don't think any of them are very plausible. It's just really random. It's one of those things that you simply cannot explain. And it's, like I said, it's one of the most prevalent issues out there. So that's the WTF issue. And you already know how I said how, if you, press the attack button while using Helmbreaker without pressing left, the Doppelganger will simply use one hit with the Yamato. And if you press left plus attack button without holding the attack button, that is, Rapid Slash. So you're supposed to press left and hold the attack button so that the Doppelganger can use Rising Star. But if you hold the attack button for, too long and then you release it at the right time, the Doppelganger will end up using this Judgment Cut, and that's not what you want, obviously. So hold the attack button, but not for too long, just a little while. Here you can see how there was no inverse Million Stab. For whatever reason, Vergil did a normal Million Stab. This shouldn't happen. The inverted, reversed Million Stab should happen by default. So I have no idea why this happened. It only happened like once or twice, so yeah. Here you can basically see how the enemy fell to the ground while I was using Million Stab. So I guess they weren't close enough to me, so they kind of fell to the ground. I don't know, it only happened like twice or something. It's not a very prevalent issue, but I just feel like, mentioning it because I have no idea how to affect it, so... here you can see how I used Air Trick too fast. So as you can see, Vergil was about to use Round Trip. He was about to release it. I released the attack button in time, but then I immediately used Air Trick to teleport to the enemy, and I canceled this whole thing. So I canceled Vergil releasing Round Trip. So make sure that you release Round Trip, and only when it's been released, only when it's out, only then do you use Air Trick to teleport to the enemy. Because as you can see here, what happened was I basically used Air Trick too early before Vergil could even, throw the Round Trip. So, yeah. Here you can see how I used the slow version of the Doppelganger. I didn't change the Doppelganger's mode from slow to normal. And what happened was, obviously, the Doppelganger took too long to use Rising Star, because the slow Doppelganger, as the name itself suggests, is very slow. He is delayed. So he mimics your commands, but he does it like, I don't know, half a second later. So, yeah, you gotta change the Doppelganger's mode if you want him to react immediately to what you're pressing. And finally, you have this incredibly annoying issue. So say you did the combo perfectly. Everything is seemingly perfect. You threw the Mirage, you threw the round trip, you did everything, and now you're charging hell on earth, but then this happens. So the enemy, who is trapped on the overdrive beam, right? So when the beam explodes, it's supposed to launch the enemy in Vergil's direction, and they will basically be caught by the round trip, and they won't fall to the ground. But sometimes the overdrive beam explodes, but the enemy doesn't get it, blown away. They just fall to the ground in that same place, and that's it, And that is just so insulting. You could add that, farting sound effect. And basically, I just have no idea how to affect this. It's not that common, but this is something that happened with the ice combo as well. Like, how you're supposed to... You're basically supposed to wait for the enemy to get blown away by the overdrive beam. When the overdrive beam explodes, the enemy is supposed to get blown away and land directly onto Vergil's finger so that he could use this taunt. And sometimes it just wouldn't happen. Like, the overdrive beam would explode and the enemy would stay there. They would just fall to the ground. And that is exactly what happens here. And unfortunately, I have no way of explaining this. I have no way to explain how you could possibly circumvent this. Luckily, it doesn't happen too often, but it is very, very unfortunate that this happens at the very end of the combo. So, yeah.